Howdy. Today's distance learning short lesson is about how America gets into the Vietnam War. When you really think about it, what is so pressing? How do we get into a war that's going to take over 55,000 Americans? It's going to be one of America's longest wars. And in the end, we're not going to win it. We're going to leave it. So how do we actually get into it? Today's lesson, I want to take a look at what it gets in, how we got into it. And it'll also set up a couple of links that we're going to have on the classroom to the fog of war and another look at this. All right, it goes back to World War II. The French had Vietnam as a colony. After France surrenders, Japan takes over Vietnam. The Vietnamese people did not like the French running them, nor did they like the Japanese, and they would ask for American help, and we would send it through the OSS, which is the early CIA. The leader of the Vietnamese was a guy named Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh had been a young man who'd been around the world, had experience, and he fought the Japanese. After the war, he fights the French. And as a matter of fact, you're going to see the link in 1945, 46. He actually reaches out to America and sends us a letter asking us for help. And in this, which you're going to see the link to, he actually quotes us the Declaration of Independence. Well, we back the French because it's the Cold War and the French are our ally, and later on we're going to need them in the fight against Russia and the commies and all that stuff. So we back the French. Ho Chi Minh rallies a lot of the Vietnamese against the French. They become known as the Viet Minh. And the Viet Minh fight the French. I'm going to show you a clip. There'll be a link in the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young. There's a very great clip about the French being attacked by the Vietnamese. The French, it was like, how do you kill an elephant? How does an ant kill an elephant? 10,000 bites. It's an old saying. How do the Viet Minh beat the French? Guerrilla warfare. Attack here, attack there, and attack. Finally, the French decide to set up a fort called Dien Bien Phu. If you look at the chart here, Dien Bien Phu is on the edge of Vietnam, the western edge by Laos. The French build a fort, and in effect, they're daring the Viet Minh to attack them, to come out of the jungles, because they French think, with their tanks and air power and everything, they can win a set-piece battle. What they don't know is that the Viet Minh are more than up to the task. They will dismantle artillery pieces, carry them over the mountains, carry over hundreds of thousands of rounds of artillery, and they will surround Dien Bien Phu and open fire and attack them. The French, in their great plan, was they were going to bring reinforcements up to reinforce Dien Bien Phu. But that would be attacked along the road heading up there. If you want to read a really good book, Bernard Fall wrote two great books. One's called Street with No Joy, and it's about the French being attacked, and that's the video clip you'll see in We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And then he wrote a book about Dien Bien Phu and how it fell. It's called Hell in a Very Small Place. Great book. In the end, France is desperate. They leave, they surrender after Dien Bien Phu falls, they surrender. Vietnam is split into the north and the south. It's the same thing we did in Korea right after World War II. Let's split Korea up. The north we're going to give to the communists, the south to our friends. And what do we get? We get a war out of it when the north attacks the south. So we are really surprised then after the French leave Vietnam that the United States and the USSR decide to split Vietnam up. They come up with this thing of there'll be an election some year and then they can decide to reunite, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't happen. So we screw up in the Korean War by setting a country up into two parts. We do the exact same thing in the 1950s to Vietnam. The northern part, under Ho Chi Minh, will appeal to China and then later Russia, and they will become a communist country. The south will be our allies, and we're going to help them with weapons. The logic is, it's called the domino theory. If you put a whole bunch of dominoes in a row and you knock one over, all the dominoes fall. We started looking at this in a Cold War approach. Well, if Vietnam falls, then Laos falls, and then Cambodia falls, and then Malaysia. And it's just like a whole bunch of dominoes. You've got to stop the dominoes early on. So we decide we're going to help the South. We don't want them all to knock over. So we start sending weapons and advisors to the South under President John F. Kennedy. The leaders that we back in the South are not necessarily the greatest leaders. As a matter of fact, there's a coup when the leader, the dictator down south, a guy named Diem, is massacred or is killed, murdered. And America starts having questions about this. What really is where it gets important and what our big lesson today is about is the Gulf of Tonkin attack. We send weapons and people to South Vietnam to help them. One of the groups that we send is, if you look at the picture here, a destroyer. We send some destroyers, and they are off Vietnam in a place called the Gulf of Tonkin. Now, officially, we're there just because we're just great people and we love the area. Unofficially, the Navy is going to help the South Vietnamese because the North Vietnamese start attacking them. They start getting rebels down south called the Viet Cong. And they're going to be doing that. So South Vietnam is going to start doing some stuff to North Vietnam. And so we are going to send our destroyers to support South Vietnamese actions. While they're in the Gulf of Tonkin, the Maddox, a destroyer, is attacked by North Vietnamese PT boats. Well, we're insulted, we're angry, so we warn North Vietnam. Imagine our surprise when they come and they attack our destroyers again. You're going to see a link, and you're going to go to this link to the Fog of War, which the man you see pictured there, that's Robert McNamara. He's a Secretary of Defense. In the Fog of War, he talks about how our destroyers, the Turner and the Maddox, the Turner and the Maddox, are attacked by these PT boats. Well, if you listen to the transcripts we actually have on the Fog of War, actual transcripts from the people that are in the Navy, that are in the Gulf, what they send back. And what we first think is an attack might not be attack, so you've got to look at the link. And it's possible that the sonar operators mistook the signals for the second attack as torpedoes, and we are reported we're attacked. If you look at this, this is the official company line. Now, we were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. Well, there's a lot of question. Did they actually attack or did they not? Did they just come out? Okay, and that's why you're going to look at that thing. We go ahead and we decide we've been attacked. We are a huge nation, powerful nation. We are not going to stand for this attack from a piddling little country. And President Johnson is going to authorize Congress, ask Congress to say, hey, let's show them we're serious. What they come up with is called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution basically says that Congress gives the president the power militarily to do whatever's necessary to take care of the situation. We start sending in more troops in 1964. We send in more boats, and we start ratcheting it up. One of Johnson's things to show that he's serious is called Operation Rolling Thunder. This is going to eventually turn into Operation Rolling Thunder, and you're going to see where we are going to bomb the crud out of North Vietnam. The picture you see here, B-52s dropping big bombs. Big bombs. We are targeting the Ho Chi Minh Trail, places in North Vietnam that we think are dangerous. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a trail through the jungle down to South Vietnam where the North Vietnamese could funnel supplies down to those people trying to overthrow the South Vietnamese government. There's going to be all sorts of limits. And by 1968-70, the limits on what we could bomb were crazy. A friend of mine who was a bomber pilot in Vietnam said it was bizarre. They would have these targets where they could not bomb the ships in the harbor unloading the stuff. They could not bomb the docks where they are unloading the Russian ships and supplies in Hanoi, but they could bomb the trains as soon as they left. They couldn't necessarily bomb where the anti-aircraft batteries of SAM missiles are being set up because there are Russians there, but then they could bomb other stuff. There was all sorts of rules. If you look at the bottom picture, this is also going to lead to some really different things. The Vietnam War is going to have where we fight a war in the jungle. But how do you see the enemy in the jungle? Easy. Spray defoliants on the jungle, kill the jungle, and go look for the enemy and what's left. This is called Agent Orange. If you see the picture there, it's also known as Operation Ranch Hand. And this is going to stretch over the Vietnam War. And it's going to have a lot of impact on our soldiers in Vietnam who are exposed to Agent Orange. One of my good buds died of cancer. That God rest his soul, Larry. And it's one of those things where it's a war that's going to get really intense by 1968-69. We're going to have 500,000 American in Vietnam. But let's go back to the beginning. Why do we actually get involved? And was it based on accurate premises? And that's where we're going to take a look on the classroom to the links on the Fog of War. And you're also going to read Ho Chi Minh's Declaration of Independence and his letter to Harry Truman.